By January 1945, the fighting in eastern France had settled into a brutal, grinding phase. The German army, battered but not broken, was attempting one last stand along the Upper Rhine during what became known as the Colmar Pocket. American and French forces pushed forward through frozen forests and open fields under constant threat of counterattack. The village of Holtzwihr, a small cluster of buildings surrounded by flat farmland, became a critical point in this struggle. Whoever controlled it controlled the approaches across the plain. On the morning of January 26th, German mountain troops launched a determined counteroffensive, supported by tanks, aimed at breaking through American lines and rolling back the advance. What followed was not supposed to be remembered as a heroic legend. It was meant to be a routine withdrawal under pressure. Company B of the 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, found itself outnumbered and exposed. German infantry advanced in disciplined formations, supported by armored vehicles pushing steadily forward. American artillery was limited, visibility was poor, and communications were strained. As German pressure mounted, Company B began falling back towards safer positions. One by one, American soldiers withdrew under orders, leaving behind burning vehicles, abandoned equipment, and fields churned into mud and snow by shellfire. In the chaos of the retreat, a single figure remained forward of the line, refusing to move. That soldier was Audie Murphy, 19 years old, barely 5'5", weighing little more than 100 pounds, and already a hardened combat veteran. Murphy was not supposed to be there. He had ordered his men to pull back while he covered their withdrawal. This was not bravado. It was necessity. Someone had to slow the German advance long enough for Company B to escape encirclement. Murphy took position near a disabled M10 tank destroyer that had been hit and set ablaze. Ammunition inside the vehicle was cooking off, and the tank could explode at any moment. Rather than retreat, Murphy climbed onto the burning vehicle, exposed in full view of the advancing Germans. From that position, he manned the .50 caliber machine gun mounted on the turret. He was alone, silhouetted against fire and smoke, with no infantry support and German troops advancing in numbers that should have overwhelmed him within minutes. What followed defied every assumption about battlefield survival. For over an hour, Audie Murphy held his ground. He fired continuously, cutting down advancing German infantry and forcing them to take cover. When ammunition ran low, he adjusted fire. When the Germans regrouped, he engaged again. At the same time, Murphy used a field telephone to call in American artillery strikes, directly onto his own position. He calmly relayed coordinates while under machine gun fire, correcting artillery fall as shells landed around him. German troops believed they were facing a well-defended American position, unaware that only one man stood between them and a breakthrough. From the German perspective, the resistance made no sense. Intelligence suggested the Americans had withdrawn, yet every attempt to advance was met with devastating fire. German mountain troops, experienced, disciplined, and accustomed to overcoming resistance, were pinned down by what appeared to be an impossible defense. Tanks hesitated. Infantry stalled. Momentum evaporated. What should have been a swift counterattack turned into confusion and delay. By the time the Germans realized the truth, the opportunity was gone. American artillery intensified. Reinforcements arrived. The counterattack collapsed. When the firing finally stopped, Audie Murphy climbed down from the burning tank destroyer and rejoined his men. He was wounded, exhausted, and nearly deaf from the noise of gunfire and explosions. Around him lay dozens of German casualties. Later assessments credited Murphy with killing approximately 50 enemy soldiers and wounding many more. More importantly, his stand had stopped a force of roughly 250 German troops and 6 tanks long enough to save Company B from destruction. The line held. The Colmar Pocket would soon collapse. This was not a myth born of exaggeration. It was one of the most thoroughly documented single-handed defensive actions in World War II. Eyewitness testimony from American soldiers, German reports, and battlefield analysis all confirm what happened at Holtzwihr. A teenage soldier, standing alone on a burning vehicle, changed the outcome of a battle through sheer resolve, tactical clarity, and extraordinary courage. But to understand how this moment was possible, one must understand who Audie Murphy was, and how he arrived at that frozen field in France. Long before Audie Murphy became a symbol of battlefield courage, he was a product of extreme poverty and responsibility far beyond his years. Born in 1925 in rural Texas, Murphy grew up as the son of sharecroppers during the Great Depression. His childhood was defined by hunger, instability, and loss. When his father abandoned the family and his mother later died, Murphy, still a teenager, became responsible for helping raise his younger siblings. He hunted rabbits and small game not as a pastime, but as a means of survival. This early exposure to hardship forged traits that would later define him in combat: self-reliance, calm under pressure, and an ability to endure conditions that broke others. When the United States entered World War II, Murphy was underage, underweight, and physically unimpressive by military standards. Multiple branches rejected him. He persisted until the Army finally accepted him, less because he fit the ideal soldier, and more because the Army needed men. Murphy arrived in Europe as a replacement infantryman, one of thousands expected to fill gaps left by casualties. He was not groomed for heroism. He was trained to survive. From his earliest engagements in Italy and later southern France, Murphy displayed a pattern that would repeat throughout his service. He paid close attention, learned quickly, and refused to panic when situations deteriorated. Officers noted his ability to move under fire and his willingness to take responsibility without waiting for orders. He was not reckless. He was deliberate. By the time the fighting reached France, Murphy had already been wounded multiple times and decorated for bravery. Each award reflected the same reality. Murphy consistently stepped forward when others could not out of ambition, but because someone had to. The battles leading up to Holtzwihr hardened Murphy further. The fighting in France after D-Day was not defined by sweeping advances, but by close-range engagements in villages, forests, and open fields where artillery and machine guns dominated. Murphy learned how German units maneuvered, how they probed defenses, and how quickly a position could collapse if leadership failed. He also learned the importance of delay, how holding ground for minutes could mean the difference between an organized withdrawal and annihilation. These lessons were not abstract. They were learned through blood and repetition. Murphy watched men freeze, panic, and die. He learned to suppress fear not because he lacked it, but because fear was useless once the shooting started. By January 1945, Murphy was no longer just a rifleman. He was a battlefield leader in practice, if not always in rank. He understood terrain, timing, and enemy behavior intuitively. When Company B faced the German counterattack at Holtzwihr, Murphy recognized immediately what was happening. The German push was coordinated and aggressive. If it broke through quickly, the entire American line in the sector could collapse. Murphy also understood something else. His men were exhausted, exposed, and outnumbered. A clean withdrawal required someone to absorb the initial shock. That role would almost certainly be fatal. Murphy did not hesitate, not because he sought death, but because he had learned that hesitation was worse. The decision to stay behind was not a dramatic gesture. It was a tactical choice made in seconds. Murphy ordered his men to fall back while he covered them. He chose the burning M10 tank destroyer because it offered elevation, firepower, and a clear field of fire. It was also dangerously unstable. The ammunition inside could detonate at any moment. Murphy accepted that risk without comment. Years of deprivation and combat had stripped away the luxury of considering alternatives. There was one position that might work, and he took it. What followed at Holtzwihr was not the result of superhuman ability, but of accumulated experience applied at a decisive moment. Murphy knew how long he needed to hold. He knew how to use the .50 caliber machine gun to maximum effect. He knew how to call artillery and adjust fire under pressure. And most importantly, he knew that if he broke, the line would break with him. The stand at Holtzwihr was extraordinary, but it did not emerge from nowhere. It was the culmination of a life spent surviving impossible odds, long before the Germans ever came into his sights. When the German assault reached full momentum near Holtzwihr, it followed a familiar pattern. Infantry advanced in coordinated waves, supported by armored vehicles probing for weaknesses. The objective was not subtle: overwhelm the American forward positions, break through, and exploit the open ground beyond. Audie Murphy understood this immediately. From his elevated position on the disabled M10 tank destroyer, he had a clear view of the approaching enemy. The burning vehicle gave him something rare in defensive combat: height, visibility, and a commanding field of fire. The .50 caliber machine gun mounted on the turret was designed to engage aircraft and light vehicles, but Murphy used it to devastating effect against infantry. He fired in controlled bursts, sweeping the advancing Germans as they attempted to cross open ground. Each burst forced them to drop, scatter, or retreat, disrupting their formation and slowing their advance. What mattered most was not the number of rounds fired, but the timing. Murphy fired only when targets were exposed, conserving ammunition while maximizing psychological impact. At the same time, Murphy coordinated artillery fire with remarkable precision. Using a field telephone connected to American artillery units behind the line, he calmly relayed coordinates while under direct enemy fire. This was not blind bombardment. Murphy adjusted fire based on where German troops regrouped, forcing them to constantly reposition. From the German perspective, the battlefield became unpredictable and hostile. Every attempt to advance was met not only by machine gun fire, but by artillery exploding among their ranks. Smoke, debris, and casualties compounded confusion. German officers believed they were facing a well-prepared American defensive position with overlapping fields of fire and coordinated support. The idea that a single soldier was responsible for the resistance never entered their calculations. Doctrine did not allow for such a possibility. As the engagement dragged on, German momentum stalled. Tanks hesitated to push forward without infantry cover. Infantry hesitated to advance under sustained fire and artillery bombardment. The German assault lost its rhythm. What should have been a decisive push turned into a series of cautious probes, each repelled with force. Murphy, exposed and wounded, remained in place. The M10 beneath him continued to burn, flames licking around the turret as ammunition cooked off sporadically inside the hull. The danger was constant and immediate, but Murphy never abandoned his position. He later recalled that he was not thinking about survival, only about maintaining fire and keeping the Germans at a distance. The longer he held, the more time his unit gained to reorganize. Eventually, the German attack began to falter. Artillery fire intensified as American units stabilized their line. Reinforcements arrived. What had begun as a dangerous withdrawal turned into a defensive stand. Only then did Murphy dismount the burning tank destroyer and fall back to rejoin his men. He had been wounded in the leg, was nearly out of ammunition, and was physically exhausted. Yet when he returned to Company B, he immediately organized a counterattack. This detail is often overlooked, but it underscores the tactical clarity of his actions. Murphy was not content to simply survive. He understood that broken momentum had to be exploited before the enemy could regroup. The aftermath of the engagement confirmed the scale of what had occurred. German casualties were heavy. Estimates credited Murphy with killing approximately 50 enemy soldiers and wounding many more, though exact numbers vary. More importantly, the German attack had failed. 6 tanks were unable to break through. A force of roughly 250 experienced mountain troops had been delayed and repelled by what they believed to be a well-defended American position. In reality, they had been stopped by one soldier applying discipline, firepower, and tactical awareness with ruthless efficiency. Military historians later described the stand at Holtzwihr as the most thoroughly documented example of a single soldier halting a vastly superior force in World War II. Eyewitness accounts from Murphy's comrades align with German reports describing unexpected resistance and confusion. The terrain, timing, and outcome all confirm the same conclusion. Murphy's actions altered the course of the engagement. This was not luck, nor was it reckless heroism. It was the deliberate application of combat principles, fire superiority, delay, deception, and coordination, executed flawlessly under conditions that should have made such control impossible. What happened at Holtzwihr was not a miracle. It was a demonstration of what one trained, determined soldier could accomplish when experience, necessity, and resolve converged at a single moment. And yet, even this does not fully explain why Murphy remained standing when nearly anyone else would have fallen back. To understand that, one must look beyond the battlefield, to what came after, and how the war marked him long after the guns fell silent. In the immediate aftermath of the fighting near Holtzwihr, the scale of what Audie Murphy had done was not fully understood. Company B regrouped, re-established its line, and prepared for the possibility of another German assault. Only gradually did reports filter upward describing how the German counterattack had stalled, how tanks had failed to advance, and how American positions that should have collapsed were still intact. Officers began piecing together accounts from soldiers who had witnessed Murphy's stand. What emerged was not a story of reckless heroics, but of deliberate action taken under impossible circumstances. Murphy had not simply fired wildly from a burning vehicle, he had controlled the engagement, coordinated artillery, and denied the enemy freedom of movement for over an hour. In doing so, he had preserved the fighting strength of his unit and prevented a potentially disastrous breakthrough. German records added further weight to these conclusions. Post-war analysis of German unit reports from the Colmar Pocket described unexpected resistance and heavy casualties inflicted by what was believed to be a well-prepared American defensive position. The Germans never suspected that a single soldier had been responsible for holding them back. This detail is crucial. Murphy's success relied not only on firepower, but on deception created by discipline and consistency. He presented the illusion of strength where none existed. From a tactical perspective, this was textbook defensive warfare executed at an individual level. For American commanders reviewing the engagement, the implications were clear. Murphy's actions had not merely delayed the enemy. They had decisively altered the outcome of a local battle. The recommendation for the Medal of Honor followed swiftly. Unlike many wartime awards, Murphy's case required little embellishment. The documentation was extensive. Eyewitness testimony from multiple soldiers, battlefield reports, and after-action summaries all aligned. There was no ambiguity about the risk he had accepted or the effect he had achieved. On June 2, 1945, Audie Murphy received the Medal of Honor, becoming the most decorated American soldier of World War II. Yet, even as his reputation grew, Murphy himself struggled with what the recognition represented. He did not see his actions as exceptional in the way others did. To him, the stand at Holtzwihr was a moment when retreat was impossible and action unavoidable. What is often overlooked is how deeply the experience marked him. Murphy survived the war physically, but the psychological toll was severe. Like many combat veterans, he suffered from what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. Nightmares, insomnia, and emotional withdrawal plagued him for years. The image of the burning tank destroyer, the constant gunfire, and the knowledge that a single misstep would have meant death never fully left him. Unlike many veterans of his generation, Murphy eventually spoke openly about these struggles. He used his public profile to advocate for better understanding and treatment of combat-related trauma, challenging the notion that courage ended when the fighting stopped. In this sense, the stand at Holtzwihr was not just a defining moment of Murphy's war, it was the moment that shaped the rest of his life. The same sense of responsibility that had driven him to stay behind on the battlefield compelled him to confront the cost of survival afterward. He rejected the idea that heroism erased suffering. Instead, he argued that true recognition of service required acknowledging both bravery and its consequences. This perspective set him apart in an era when psychological wounds were often dismissed or ignored. The recognition Murphy received was deserved and historically significant, but it also highlighted a broader truth about warfare. Extraordinary acts are rarely performed by extraordinary people in isolation. They are performed by individuals shaped by circumstance, necessity, and experience, often at great personal cost. Murphy did not seek to become a symbol. He became one because the situation demanded something beyond ordinary endurance. The Medal of Honor recognized his actions at Holtzwihr, but it could not capture the full weight of what he carried afterward. To understand Audie Murphy fully, one must look beyond the frozen field in France. His story did not end when the German assault broke, nor when the medal was placed around his neck. It continued in the years that followed as he grappled with the legacy of survival and chose to speak for those who could not. In doing so, he ensured that his courage would be remembered not only for what it achieved in battle, but for what it revealed about the human cost of war. Murphy's stand also challenges common assumptions about how battles are decided. Large-scale warfare is often explained through strategy, logistics, and firepower. Yet, at Holtzwihr, the decisive factor was delay. By holding the Germans in place for over an hour, Murphy denied them momentum at a critical moment. That delay allowed American artillery to reassert control, infantry units to reorganize, and the defensive line to stabilize. In warfare, minutes can matter as much as divisions. Murphy understood this intuitively. His goal was not victory in the conventional sense, but time. That clarity of purpose, knowing exactly what had to be achieved and for how long, is what transformed an act of survival into a decisive action. What also makes Holtzwihr unique is its human scale. Murphy was not operating advanced technology or benefiting from overwhelming support. He stood exposed on a burning tank destroyer, wounded, isolated, and fully aware that his position could explode at any moment. His actions were not fueled by ideology or hatred, but by responsibility. He had ordered his men to withdraw. That order bound him to stay. In this way, Murphy's courage was inseparable from leadership. He did not ask others to face a risk he would not accept himself. This principle, more than the number of enemies involved, is why his story continues to resonate. Yet Murphy's legacy cannot be confined to that frozen field in France. After the war, he became a public figure, an actor, and a symbol of American heroism. But he also became one of the earliest high-profile veterans to speak openly about the psychological cost of combat. At a time when such struggles were dismissed or misunderstood, Murphy insisted that courage did not end when the shooting stopped. His advocacy for veterans suffering from what is now recognized as PTSD was an extension of the same responsibility he had shown in combat. He refused to abandon others simply because the war was over. This is why the story of Audie Murphy endures. It is not merely about how one man fought 250 enemy soldiers. It is about how extreme circumstances reveal both the capacity and the limits of human endurance. Murphy's stand at Holtzwihr was extraordinary, but it was also costly. It exacted a toll that followed him for the rest of his life. Remembering that cost is essential. Without it, heroism becomes abstraction. With it, the story remains honest. Holtzwihr also serves as a reminder of how fragile outcomes can be in war. Had Murphy fallen, the German breakthrough might have succeeded. Had the timing been slightly different, artillery might not have arrived in time. History often turns on moments that never appear in grand strategy documents. It turns on individuals making decisions under pressure with incomplete information and no guarantee of survival. That does not make those moments mythical. It makes them human. In the end, Audie Murphy did not set out to become a legend. He acted because the situation demanded it, because retreat without resistance would have meant destruction for those behind him. His stand did not win the war, but it saved lives, preserved a position, and demonstrated what disciplined resolve can achieve even in the most unequal circumstances. That is why Holtzwihr still matters, not as a tale of invincibility, but as a record of what one soldier chose to do when there was no one else left to stand.